we brought her in hoping she would warm back up again. But that's just their life cycle. Other darners, common greens, along with the variegated meadowhawks, and they believe both the black and red saddlebags are migrants, meaning they're kind of like a monarch butterfly, where they will fly south, have another generation, and then perhaps another, and then move their way back north again in the following spring. Life cycle, they have incomplete metamorphosis. So once we hatch from the egg, we have several molts until we reach the largest size that we're going to get as a nymph. And then they emerge out of the water. The casing then is called an exuviae, and the young new dragonfly pumps up its wings once it gets out of the of his nymph casing, and they call that a tenorel at that time. Not a lot of color. You can see the wings are extremely transparent and kind of milky white in color. And then what they usually do is once their wings are fully extended, they they're able to fly, even though they're very soft at that point. And then they find a place to roost in the weeds someplace until they harden off, so that then they can go out and feed for the first time. Once we are on the fly, you might say, you might have been in water area and saw one dragonfly pulling another one. This is called being in tandem. It's actually the male is always first, and he grabs a hold of the female by her eyes and takes her off to the no-tell motel. And he stays, some dragonflies stay with, some males stay with the female after the mating process is done, and others just hover above her while she is laying her eggs. The mating wheel is what they call the positioning when the two are mating. The female swings up her abdomen to his second segment where he has stored his sperm, and they stay there until, and that could just be a couple of seconds, or it could be 10 to 15 minutes that they're together. One of the reasons why they would stay together is because if the male has any sperm from another male within her, he has a special scoop, and he scoops that out, gets rid of it, so that when he implants his sperm, he's assured that it's sperm that are going to fertilize her eggs when she lays them. And she lays those eggs immediately. Once they are done mating, she goes to the water, or he'll take her, if it's a darner here, he'll take her to the water, and she will lay those eggs immediately. So before we start talking about or looking at pictures of dragonflies, we want to be able to know the difference between a male and a female. The terminal appendages, they call them, on a dragonfly at the end of their abdomen are called cerci, and males have long cerci. Females have very short, stubby cerci. They don't need them for anything. They're kind of vestigial. So we can tell a male, and this would be an immature male here, from a female because of the size of the cerci. Behind the cerci, you can kind of see this dark area here. That's called the epiproct. So between the cerci and the epiproct, that's how he's going to hold on to her head. And some females in the larger dragonflies, the saddlebags, the darners, I think the wandering gliders, the females also have long cerci, but they don't have the epiproct. So that's one way that we can tell the difference between them. And this happens to be a 12-spotted skimmer. This is a mature male. He's got this prunescence. If you see a waxy white grayish coating on a dragonfly, that's called to be prunos is the term. And a mature skimmer will get that coating on their abdomen. This one would be an immature male, and this is the 12-spotted skimmer female. So they're very similar in appearance. When you see my pictures, the immature male and the female are very similar in color pattern. And then as the immature male matures, he gets to his full adult coloring. So we have 4 groups of dragonflies, 4 major groups. The darners, and one of the ways that they classify them is by the shape of their eyes. So in darners, the eyes meet totally from front to back. In the emeralds, they come to a, well, kind of like a point, but still meeting a little bit in the front. This one bumped into something in his forehead here, is got a little bump in it. This is the skimmer group, and their eyes just meet kind of like at a point. And then the clubtails have a space between their eyes, and there's usually a little bar or something, kind of like you might see on a damselfly. So those are our 4 groups. We're going to talk about common dragonflies, so we're not going to include the clubtails. I've only seen 2 clubtails in Lake County, and they're very localized, so I don't really consider them common for us here. So darners, I've seen 6 darners in Lake County. We're going to look at a picture of the common green darner. The shadow and swamp darners are fairly common also, but generally harder to come by. So this is the common green darner. He is about 3 inches long. They call them common green darners because their thorax is green. Most darners don't have a green thorax. There's only 2, at least in the East Coast, that have green for their thorax. And he's common, so he's called the common green darner. Actually, dragonflies didn't have common names until a few years ago, 20, 30 years ago, maybe. These people who wrote these books, Dennis Paulson and Sidney Dunkel and a few other people got together and said, we want the common people to know the names of dragonflies and to be interested in dragonflies. So they needed to come up with common names. So they tried to look at the dragonflies and say, well, what would you call this one? And this one became the common green darner because of his thorax. Beautiful, beautiful dragonfly. We have 2 emeralds that I have come across in Lake County that are pretty common. The Prince Basket Tail, I see it flying in a lot of places. I rarely see it land, but you can always tell if it's patrolling that it's not a darner because they're about 2.5 inches. They're a pretty good sized dragonfly because they're in the family, so they have these nice green eyes. And darners don't have pattern on their wings. So the Prince Basket Tail has a spot at its base, its nodus, and out here at the tip. I did include flight times. I didn't say about the common green, but common green darners, since they're one of the migrants, they believe they come up here. I saw one in March several years ago. Well, I've seen them in March twice. So as soon as the weather warms up, they're up here flying around. They lay their eggs, and then we have a hatch in July usually where you see tons of dragonflies because of the big hatch that happens then. So the Prince Basket Tail also has a long or a full summer flight time. The other common emerald is the common basket tail. They call them basket tails because these groups of dragonflies hold on to their eggs in what they're calling a basket. So this is the female holding on. Actually, while I was watching her, she was exuding these eggs, and it was getting to be a bigger and bigger group. Finally, when they all get out, then she will go lay them someplace. So the male and the female here look pretty much the same. And they're a kind of an early dragonfly, April through July, not very big, but they also are a patroller. So if you see a small brownish dragonfly early spring, more than likely you're seeing a common basket tail. The rest of the common dragonflies that we see are in the skimmer category, the skimmer family. And the ones that I have here highlighted are the ones we're going to look at. But you can see we have 26, or I've recorded 26 skimmers in Lake County. These three over here are ones that I have not actually seen, but have had people send me pictures so that I know that we've had them in the area. Blue dasher is probably the most common dragonfly you're going to see. It's small, about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches long, but it's just everywhere. I don't think I've been to any body of water where I have not seen blue dashers. And here you can see how closely the immature male looks to the female. This one is starting to get his blue on him. Another very common dragonfly is the eastern pondhawk. You know it's a pondhawk if he's got a green face. There are a number of dragonflies that have blue on them as adults, but none have a green face like the eastern pondhawk does. And the immatures also have a green face. So this is an immature male. This is the immature female. You can see those cerci. You know this is a male. And this is a female because her cerci are so much smaller. But appearance-wise, they're very, very, very similar. This is transitioning from being an immature to, I call him a teenager because he's getting his blue. He doesn't have prunos. He's not prunos yet. This one, look how waxy this one is. But he's still got a little bit of green in his thorax. So you might think, oh, I found a new species of dragonfly because that's what I thought. And then I realized, oh, he's got a green face. He's got these white cerci, which are two indicators for the eastern pondhawk. My very favorite dragonfly, I call him my first favorite because they're all my favorites, is the slaty skimmer. Beautiful, beautiful, slaty blue, everything, his eyes, his thorax, his abdomen. Just a gorgeous dragonfly. He's about 2 inches long. Flight time from June to September. Immature male looks nothing like him, but looks very much like the female. Halloween pennant gets its name from its color. This one has black and orange. This is the male. The female is yellowish, where this one is red. And they don't come out until middle of June. And I've never seen any in October, but I don't do a lot of dragon flying in October. So, but that's what the book says about their flight time. Common whitetail is a very common dragonfly. If you see dragonfly, look at the prunosity here. Very, very white on his abdomen, black, huge spots on his wings. This is the male common whitetail. This is a female. And the immature male up here, you can see he's got the wing patterning of the mature male, and the female has a different pattern. So that helps us identify the immature male from the female. May through September, long flight season for this one. Widow skimmer is another beautiful dragonfly. You can see again how much the immature male looks like the female. About 2 inches long, another good long flight time for this one, June through October. 12-spotted skimmer, another very common dragonfly. They call him 12 spots because we're counting the black spots and there are 12 of those. Female down here, immature male up here. Eastern amberwing is one of our tiniest little dragonflies, 3/4 to 1 inch long, little bitty thing, beautiful amber colored wings, hence the name. And this is the female. She looks like a little bee. May through October. Now at Oak Ridge Prairie, which is one of the Lake County parks here, I usually don't see Eastern amber wings there till June when the Howling Pennants come out. So I've never seen any that early. Wandering gliders, another one of those patrollers. If you see a yellowish dragonfly with big red eyes, then you're probably seeing a wandering glider. They're about 2 inches long, have a decent flight time of June through October. I see these a lot out at the 129th Street. I call it the mitigation area there by Wolf Lake. That's probably where I saw my first wandering glider. Spot wing glider I saw out there, also black saddlebags. So there's a number of dragonflies that I've seen in that location. The meadowhawks are all red except for one, and I don't think that one's in our area. But if you see a red dragonfly, it's some sort of meadowhawk. The ruby is the most common, but the hardest to identify because they say all other meadowhawks look like a ruby at some time during their life cycle. So I usually put my dragonflies up on Odonata Central for verification. And the only ones that the guy who was doing my vetting would not vet the ruby meadowhawks because he says you have to actually look at the sexual reproductive parts to give them a good ID. But because of their face and their legs, I kind of have a few that I'm pretty sure are rubies. So a nice black triangular pattern on the abdomen and kind of a tannish colored face, black legs. The autumn meadowhawk used to be called the yellow-legged meadowhawk because they have yellow legs, but as they get older and more mature, the legs will turn black. So that was confusing. So they changed the name to autumn meadowhawk because of its flight time. Look here, July through December. I actually saw or knew of a lady who saw a flying autumn meadowhawk out at Miller Beach area in December, excuse me, a couple of years ago. And these are all small dragonflies, little bitty, about 1.5 inches long. So not as much of that red triangular pattern on their abdomens. This is the white-faced meadowhawk. It's listed as uncommon, excuse me, but I see it more. I see it at a lot of places in our area. So for me, it's common. It might be locally common, but overall maybe it's considered uncommon. But Curry has it listed as uncommon in his book. But another long flight time, May through October, and they're called a white face because they have a white face, but they also have that triangular pattern. So until their face gets truly white, you might confuse it for a ruby. The saddlebags are the last group of dragonflies for us. Saddlebags are known for this big saddle appearance on their hind wings. Pretty good size, about 2¼ inches long, good long flight time. And we see them just about everywhere. If you see a dragonfly flying kind of hunched over, a big black area on it, it's probably your black saddlebags. Excuse me. Carolina saddlebags is considered common. I don't see it as often as I see a red saddlebags, but it is also red in color. This one looks kind of brownish because I'm taking it up a picture of it. It's high up. They like to perch up high. And so it's against the sun. But he does not have a little window in his wings, and that's going to be the difference between the red saddlebags, which has this little window in his saddle pattern. So that's how we're going to distinguish between the red saddlebags and the Carolina. These are the books that I have, well, not all of them, but the ones for Indiana that have helped me. Of course, Curry's book is Dragonflies of Indiana. I like his book a lot. It's gives good descriptions. I would just, if you're getting it, be wary of what he says is in each county, because obviously he gave Indiana 11 and I'm at 36 right now. So obviously he couldn't be everywhere all the time, and probably had records, you know, that were given to him from people in the areas. Dragonflies and Damselflies of the East by Dennis Paulson. Excellent book. I call that my Bible of dragonflies. Dennis Paulson also recently released a natural history of dragonflies and damselflies. I love this book. I read it cover to cover. He's got pictures of dragonflies from across the world, but then he's got, at the beginning of each chapter, a section on behavior and things, which gives you a wealth of information about dragonflies. I also like Sidney Dunkel's book, Dragonflies Through Binoculars. So there's lots of different books that you can go out and find that are going to help you identify your dragonflies. You can put them up picture-wise on Odonata Central, bugguide.net. There's a couple of Facebook pages that'll also give you some help for identifying your dragonflies. And I think that was my last slide.
Right.
Did I get done in 20 minutes?
That's a little bit more, but we'll allow that. Thanks very much, Lois. And people can find out if they have questions. We'll talk about it after the next presentation. Isabella?
Hi, everyone.
All right. You have her biography, so I'll just let you introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Iza Redlinsky. I'm a conservation ecologist at the Field Museum. And today, I will be speaking with you about pollinators and things we can do, the things we can do to help it. But before I share my screen, I would ask Lois to please stop sharing yours, because I can't.
Thank you. I was trying to figure that out. Yes.
It's completely fine. This happens. So I would ask, yes. And so now that you've done that, I can share my screen. Excellent. Hopefully, there we go. You guys see it then? Everything's fine. Do I get thumbs up, thumbs down? I can read the audience, sort of speak. Can you hear me well too? Yes. Okay.
Everything's fine.
Awesome. So like I said, I'm a conservation ecologist at the Field Museum, and my background is in large-scale restorations. But since I got to the Field Museum a little over 4 years ago, I've been working more in urban areas and thinking how we can create more habitat in that landscape. And we've done a lot of work in that. And some of the work was to think about, you know, whether nature needs cities. We know cities need nature, right? We know that we get a lot of benefits from having nature around in urban spaces, but we are not completely sure whether, or maybe a few years ago, the cat wasn't out of the bag. We weren't sure if nature needs cities. So we really wanted to address that. And to do it, we have a very robust and integrated team used to be urban monarch team. Now it's more like urban pollinators. That consists of ecologists such as myself, but also social scientists and geospatial analysts, so people who analyze and do things on maps, as well as community engagement specialists. Because our arm of the Field Museum is the action arm. We are called the Science Action Center. And whatever we do is not just theoretical and academic, it has to have an underground component, which is my favorite part. So we know that cities need nature, like I said, but we really wanted to address that whole other idea where in urban spaces where we think there's not a lot of green areas, does nature need those spaces in order to survive? And we studied the monarch butterfly to do that. And why the monarch butterfly? Well, it's a very charismatic species, as many of you know. It's an insect that has gotten a lot of attention, but a lot of it is because it has declined, and we'll talk about it, but also because it does this charismatic migration from Michoacan, Mexico to Canada and back every year. And it's not one individual that does it, it's a series of individuals. So there's few populations within 1 year, and it's pretty extraordinary. Another really cool thing about the monarch butterfly is that it needs milkweed for its life cycle. The caterpillars will only eat milkweed plants, and the female will only lay its eggs on milkweed plants. But I digress. I do that a lot. You'll see that. These are some of the notes on how the population of the monarch butterfly has decreased. And it's decreased anywhere between 80 to 90%, depending who you are. People say 80 because if we start saying over 90, that means the process for listing this as an endangered species should start. And that would have huge economic repercussions, I guess. So as you see, the population has decreased. And if you're wondering why the heck are we measuring butterfly in hectares, because that's a very valid question. It's because the butterflies, once they migrate south to Michoacan in Mexico, they overwinter, they roost on fir trees. And pretty much what scientists have figured out to do is through aerial measurements, measure the area that they cover up because it would be really hard to count every single butterfly because there's literally millions of them. From people who have gone there, I hear you can hear them moving their wings because it's quiet. You're not allowed to talk there. And there's so many of them that you actually hear the wings moving, which blows my mind. I don't know about you. But as you see, the numbers have decreased and we have better years and worse years. And many things have really affected the plight of the monarch butterfly. One of them is climate change, which is just like with many other things, sort of adds injury. It's like rubbing salt into a wound, you know, like it insult to an already existing injury. A lot of it is fragmentation, of course, habitat destruction, but also we know that lack of resources for the monarch to complete its life cycle. So when the monarch is a caterpillar, it needs the milkweed plants to reproduce. And if you can think of the corn belt where the monarch migrates through about 30 years ago, it used to have a whole bunch of milkweed growing throughout the corn and soybean fields, and especially on the sides of the roads. And then we came up with Roundup Ready crops, meaning we can spray glyphosate, which kills everything, except those crops that have been genetically changed and they're unaffected. And, you know, to be honest, if I were a farmer, I would probably want to also get rid of milkweed because it has latex in it as its sap, and it gums up the equipment. So it was a harm in a way to the farmers. But what this resulted in was the monarch butterflies didn't have enough milkweeds to lay their eggs on. And then once they're adult butterflies, the monarchs need pollinator sources, and they need to drink nectar. And it's especially important in late fall as they're migrating south. So planting asters and goldenrods and other late blooming things is actually really beneficial. So because those populations have decreased, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declared all hands on deck approach and figured out that we have to plant 1.8 billion with a B, just let that settle in, because that's a lot, stems of milkweeds to sort of make the population, the eastern population, stay at its current levels. So not go up, but not decrease. And that's a lot of stems. And just so we have an understanding, one plant, like if you have swamp milkweed, it will have few stems in there. So how you define a plant is actually arguable, but it's still a whole lot. And when people thought about, you know, where can those areas where the monarch go, they thought about the ag fields and the nature preserves and the rights of ways, the little strips along the highway. But if you're like in Calumet, it's all Phragmites or Tizo. They thought about all of this, and cities, yes. And then they did like, you know, rights of ways can do 10% and ag fields can do this percent. Guess what percent cities got? We got a big fat 0. And my colleagues at the Field Museum looked around and we sort of went, well, we know there are milkweeds in the city because we live there, we work there, we play there, we worship there. There's milkweeds in urban spaces. We might not know exactly how much there is and where they are, but it's there. The question became, do monarchs need cities? But really this was like using a monarch to answer a broader question, which was, do cities really need nature? And why would we think that there is not much hope for nature in cities? Well, you see, you know, it doesn't include Indiana, my apologies. But this is National Land Cover Database from 2011. And it has Cook County and the color counties on there. And the more red it is, the more impervious surfaces, so your asphalt, cement, etc., areas that water cannot percolate through buildings, it has. And if you look at it at this sort of resolution, it shows like, you know, it's hopeless. The cities really, there's nothing green. And this is just a close-up of the word where Chicago's at. There's Field Museum on here. You can see, there we are. But if you do a high resolution land cover, it really picks up, you can start seeing the green. So the green cover layer on there is the grass shrub layer. So pretty much everything that's not a tree, that's green, that doesn't have a building on it, what we would call plantable space. And this is what that same area has. Once you take out the buildings and the other impervious surfaces, this is a lot of lawn, etc., where you don't have to do any heavy lifting to plant milkweeds or other native plants and do a lot of infrastructure removal. That's unnecessary. Then we wondered, where the heck are those places? Like, is this all big institutions like you see Field Museum here and Northerly Island? Like, because as an individual, I don't have much of a say what happens on a park district land, for example. But then when we divided it by different land use types, you see what I see. The residential area really pops up. Those are our front and backyards. Don't forget your front yards. Those are the common areas between buildings where people can convert lawn into monarch habitat. So then what we did, we looked at some exemplary sites. So some sites are already gardened with native plants. We saw how much milkweed there was. So it wasn't just like a field of milkweed, but like well-designed gardens with native plants. We saw what percentage were milkweed, and we calculated that if small amount of the plantable space gets converted into native gardens or gets gardened into with native plants, then urban areas in the area where the eastern population of the monarch butterfly is, urban areas can provide almost a third of that 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. And the power for that is really in you and me, because the Cook County Forest Preserves and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, they're already doing their part. They're already mostly doing a lot of restoration, which creates habitat for monarchs and other pollinators. But a lot of that lawn is in my hands and in your hands in our collective action. So this is a beautiful graphic that my social science friend, colleague Lex Winter came up with. And she looked at what does it take to create a monarch butterfly. It takes a milkweed plant, but in order to plant a milkweed plant, the supply chain has to happen. So it has to be flows of information and materials that are mediated by groups and individuals to make monarch conservation action possible. And these flows and exchanges are shaped by the individual and their cultural values, perceptions, and beliefs. And people bring their participation into networks. So those values and perceptions and beliefs, which we mentioned, are particularly diverse in cities, and they motivate people to take action on behalf of the monarch butterfly. So people must also have the power to make that decision. And then once they have that power and they have the materials, and they have the information and their value system buys into it, they can take the action to plant a milkweed plant and help the monarch butterfly. So we're getting to the core of what can you do in your own front and backyards. And I'm gonna keep stretching the front yard there because I know a lot of us have mullets, you know, like the business up front, party in the back type of a garden where you have your daylilies and maybe something that your neighbors are used to up front, not to upset your HOAs. And then you have all these wild plants in the back. Start bringing them up front. It's okay. You're then part of the revolution to change the aesthetic. But see, I get on soapboxes. So some of the things you can do: plant milkweed plants. Plant them into that little area that you don't care about between your fence and your garage. Plant them up front. And we have different species. You have species that like full sun and dry, like the butterfly milkweed. And if you're in Indiana, it does great on that sandy soil. You have the common milkweed, which is in the lower right-hand corner, that does okay pretty much anywhere. It will literally grow out of a crack in a sidewalk. That one can be a little rambunctious in your garden too. So if you don't mind stems popping up here and there, plant that. But if you want a more of a tidy look, get some of the other species. And I will put a link to a resource where you can review that later after I'm done. Plant nectar sources, especially late season bloomers. So we talked about how adult butterflies really need nectar for food throughout. So there's a lot of things blooming, you know, in July, but once you get towards the end of August, there's a lesser of a diversity. So do put goldenrods and asters into your front and backyard. You don't have to be the tall or Canada goldenrod that takes over. There's showy goldenrod that does great. Riddell's goldenrod is one of my favorites. Those are really beautiful species, and they pop with that vibrant yellow in the fall. If you're in Illinois, pledge your milkweed. You can go to illinoismonarchproject.org and say, as an institution, a school garden, a library, a nature preserve, whatever, or an individual, you can say, I have 15 milkweed plants in my yard. And that helps the Illinois reach the goal of 160 million milkweeds that have to be planted in the next decade or so. And work with your local agencies, schools, and institutions to include native plants in their landscaping. And you know, that's just a smart thing to do. The more of those institutions will do that, the more useful, and it becomes a part of our aesthetic, and people will be more likely to do it. Go to your big box stores and ask for native plants. A lot of times they won't have them, but keep asking. I always make a point whenever I go to Menards or Home Depot to ask, because if they hear enough of times, maybe something will click. And you can see some of the large institutions, and I will toot our own horn here. Field Museum is gardening with native plants. We now have over 10,000 square feet of native plant gardens around the Field Museum, and it is our biggest exhibit. So once this whole pandemic's over, come on over and check them out. They're really beautiful. And they're well designed and a good example of what a garden can look like. Participate in a community science, and that could be monitoring dragonflies, like the previous speaker has said. But we also have a monarch community science project I would like to invite you to participate in. There's a link on there where we ask people to observe the milkweed plants in their front and backyards at their home once a week during the growing season to count the number of eggs and caterpillars. And what that allows us to answer is few things, but one of the important ones is how productive are the urban or suburban milkweeds in producing a monarch butterfly? And then we ask you a few other questions at one time, and that will help us determine like what are some of the aspects of a monarch successful garden. And there's other projects. There's Project Budburst, there's Bee Watch, Ladybug Project, Monarch Joint Venture, Journey North. If you want a community science project where you as an individual helps answer these large scientific questions, there's a project for you. And finally, certify your garden. Certifying a garden is really important because it a lot of times can tell your neighbors and people around that what you're doing is on purpose, but also is an educational tool and might let others get interested and you know, suck them into this type of a topic. And there's a whole bunch of different certifications from really broad national ones like Monarch Way Station to, you know, there's an example in the left lower corner of someone just doing a hand designed sign. There's Conservation at Home, that's on the Illinois side. There's Pollinator Habitat from National Wildlife Federation. So make sure you certify your garden. And work with elected officials. There's a Mayor's Monarch Pledge you can ask your mayor to sign, but also with your aldermen, councilmen. If you live on the Indiana side or in Calumet region, we are going to try to pass a bill to have a Calumet National Heritage Area where pollinators can be one of the themes that goes through. So work with your elected officials so they make your job easier. And then get organized and figure out what you want to do. So I have some resources here for you that can help you with that. I will put them in the chat momentarily as well. And I'll open it up for questions. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. And thanks, Brad, for doing my graphics.
Thank you very much for that. So we have the two panels, and so yes, we want questions on either dragonflies and or pollinators. And in chat, I see that
I'll take any questions. Just shoot, unmute yourself and shoot. And if I don't know, I'll tell you. I don't know.
okay.
It just was one to make sure on the statement that, you know, whether cities or whether nature needs cities. Are you mostly focusing on the residential areas in cities, or it's pretty much the rest of the cities you determine that those aren't the areas that, you know, help out with nature?
Everything helps out with nature. So it's a common effort. However, as there was a graph that showed that most of that plantable space, that area that is lawn, is in residential hands. So this is where we can have collective power. However, that doesn't mean we need to stop paying attention to industrial areas that might have a lot of green space, or university campuses or hospital campuses or other institutions. I think school gardens, church gardens are really important to put that spin onto it. And but a lot of movement starts from ground up, and so it's starts from home. But we are putting pressure. It's not just the individuals. We are working with an SNC Electric, which is a big manufacturer on the north end of Chicago in Rogers Park, to increase native pollinator habitat there. I've consulted with hospitals what they can do to add some pollinators. We work with Cook County Forest Preserves. So it's a combined effort. And yes, sorry, I don't know if I ever directly answered the question. Cities need nature. And like we said, our research shows that urban areas, if a small percent gets converted into those pollinator habitats, urban areas can provide over 30% of that 1.8 billion stems of milkweed, which is sort of mind-blowing. Because we went from having 0 to the potential of having 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. And I think the Gibson Woods wild ones always have a native plant sale on Mother's Day. And they have plenty of milkweeds to choose from, including, I heard, purple milkweed, which is like the holy grail for me a little bit. So yeah, go and plant milkweeds and other plants. But pretty much we usually say that monarch is a good gateway insect. Whatever you do to help the monarch will help many other insects along the way. Thank you, Wayne. Question?
I have a question. I'm Mary here. I'm Michael's wife, and we do grow milkweed in the backyard for the monarchs and also dill for the swallowtails. We're looking for a design for a native garden for our front yard and haven't found too many sources. Can you suggest any?
Sure, there are a few sources. So one really great place is Save the Dunes has a booklet called Living in the Dunes, where they have some garden designs. Another one is by the U.S. Forest Service, where they show some designs and plants. I have a few that I've done for the city of Gary. So what I can do is send them to Michael, and he can, because I have his email, and he can share it around. But you can always reach out to me on my email, which I am putting in as we speak, or just monarchs@fieldmuseum.org, because monarchs is much easier to spell than my last name.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Even myself, who is a self-proclaimed plant nerd, I don't have a yard, but I didn't realize that even container plants with native species on a balcony could bring in the diversity of insects that I saw in my balcony this year. Do you have any materials on that to share around, just to expand, to folks that don't just have yards that they can get their hands dirty with?
Thank you for that question. It's a great question that we get all the time. There is very little, if maybe no, scientific data which native plants do best in containers. There's a little bit of data on green roofs. And if you want to plant milkweeds and put them in your balcony, I'll give you the milkweed plants in the spring. Please observe them for eggs and caterpillars, and then leave them outside and let us know if they come back next spring. A lot of the plants, native plants, if they're in a small pot, they might freeze over. But there's few rules of thumb. So don't plant anything super tall, because it might get blown over and topple on a balcony. But we've had people record milkweeds, monarch eggs on the milkweed on as high as the 33rd floor, which is sort of spectacular. So definitely you can create habitat in your, on your balcony, if you have a roof deck. And if you don't have access to that, which many people in urban spaces don't, talk to your local school, library, place of worship, talk to your alderman. Maybe there's a patch that someone can steward somewhere.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. I also feel like basil and all these herbs, bumblebees just flock to it. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I'm with fisheries and I usually try to keep my feet in the water, but I sit in on some meetings and I drive into Lake. And they've, because of staffing reductions, they've reduced the areas that they used to mow, and those are starting to grow taller and taller. And I know the Field Museum's done some outreach things in the past over at Wolf Lake on the Illinois side. I'm just curious if you've reached out to some of the people that do the, the landscape stuff on state property to plant milkweed in those areas that aren't being mowed anymore. It seems to be, it's pretty well 3, 4, 5 acres of flat area, open space. It seems to be obvious for someone to jump in and do that.
We definitely work together with UIC's effort on the Milkweed Monarch, Illinois Monarch Pledge with Iris Caldwell and the Rights of Ways. And we have talked with, and I see Chip is on the call. So Chip, I'm calling on you. I don't know if you can hear me, but we've done like few grass to prairie restorations and forest preserves. And we've talked about, sort of testing what are the best ways to change your Eurasian grassland at a low cost into like a pollinator patch. It all needs funding and staff time. And as you know, we're all are holding on to our seats. But those are fascinating things. And as cities and forest preserves stop mowing, it's good for air quality. Even if it doesn't have many milkweeds now, it can provide habitat and sort of shelter for a lot of the pollinators, as long as you don't have like, Canada thistle or some other teasel coming in, because those things.
Well, let me ask you, is planting a milkweed plant as simple as throwing seeds on the ground?
Definitely for common milkweed, it is. So people do different things from like seed bombs and plant them into, vacant lots. So I think I saw Pheasants Forever do like the little shooting discs that they practice with from clay, and they put seeds in them and they throw them in the air, and like the members shoot at those to practice, and then they scatter with seeds. So there's creative ways of doing things. And yes, definitely plant common milkweed, and that plant, if we have an apocalypse, that plant and cockroaches, they'll survive.
Very good. Thank you.
That was a non-scientific opinion.
Yeah, Wayne Schempf here. Just a couple of questions about getting milkweed spread. That I'm the conservation chairman for the Pathway to Adventure Council that includes all of Wolf Lake and that, but and also a retired high school teacher, an elementary school teacher. That I think if you have an hour that you want to help donate to increasing, monarch habitat, spend it with empowering students to, propagate or get involved with spreading milkweed seeds and planting and observing and record keeping and so on like that. So I think that that's something that we have to tackle. And I've talked to Michael about engaging, the scouts and the school kids around Wolf Lake in order to become the empowerment team to growing a more diverse habitat at Wolf Lake.
And I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of environmental educators, because I can engage people who are already interested in a topic, but engaging children who have absolutely no interest in a given topic is not my strong suit. This is where my colleagues come in. And they have curriculum that's ready to engage students from grade, I think, 4 or 5 up to high school.
Oh, yes.
So if you email me, I will connect you with them. Another thing that we have as a perk for partners, I mentioned our Rise Native Gardens, which are huge and they're beautiful. And there's so much seed there. And it's free resource. So I've been collecting some of that seed with our colleagues, and we are in the process of cleaning it, and we can give it to partner organizations. There's few nuances to it, like do not forest preserve, because we do not necessarily know the origin of those. But if kids want to grow it at home in their front yards or backyards, they want to grow it at school to then plant anywhere, or grow it at school and have a native plant sale, that would be really great. So again, if you contact me, I can put you on a list of people, and soon I'll have a list of like what we have available, and we could send you some of the seeds or etc. But before you put it in a natural area, do contact the landowner to ask for permission.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you, because I think that the biggest potential that I've seen here is growing a very active citizen advisory group around the Superfund site, and that, like I've been participating the last 10 years or so with the Waukegan CAG around the Superfund sites up there, and engaging the Waukegan and North Chicago students in learning in, about, and from the natural resource base of the area, and how they can, at their age level and knowledge and skill level, make a significant impact in creating more biodiversity. So I think that anything that we can do, especially with the exciting people with fisheries and all the programs that were talked about yesterday, the teens especially would really like to partner up with you guys and help grow the impact of what you're doing in the region.
I'm also wondering, speaking of fisheries, if you stop mowing the areas around lakes and native populations of plants come in, that should benefit the fish in the long run, no? Is that just my like wishful thinking, or?
Well, I can't speak for the forest preserves, but yeah, you can. Yeah, leaving the buffer strips around ponds is always great. Wolf Lake, of course, has just a lot of Phragmites, and that's been a conversation for a long time. Was
Yeah.
trying to take that back a little bit. So
yeah.
You know.
And Durs had a good comment that milkweed seeds need 60 days cold wet stratification, some plant seeds in the fall, and that's true. Common milkweed, you can have
Not so
planting
much.
it in the spring, but definitely the orange butterfly weed needs 60 days of cold wet stratification. Swamp milkweed, 30 days will do. So say that pretty much what you can do is if you get the seeds from a pod, put it in a bag with a little bit of sand and just a little bit of water. So like when you squeeze the sand, the water doesn't float up, and just keep it in the back of your refrigerator for 30 days or outside in winter, or sow it over, I like sowing over like early snow because you see where the seeds fall. And then the seeds, because they're dark, they attract more sunlight, they absorb that sunlight. They get warmer and they melt into the snow. And then as the ground freezes and thaws and there's little cracks, the seed sort of makes its way into those cracks. Exactly like what I just did, like that.
Any more questions? All right, well, thank you very much. And
and thank you for your good questions and your attention. And thank you to Lois for presenting about dragonflies. They're so fascinating.
Yes, they are.
Just like birds, they move. They're so
Yes.
But I've seen this progression where like birders get bored with birds and they need the next challenge and they go to dragonflies. You're like a third person that I've seen do this progression. So, so thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you.
So, next segment, I would like just to kind of a general discussion on what kind of projects we'd like to see implemented in the Wolf Lake watershed. And I'm thinking, I know this past discussion that William Powers, for example, went through and cut all the vegetation along the waterway, and that and I had forgotten to protest that, but it was too late after they cut it. I went out there and so that's one thing I'll have to do is to ask them not to do that because I don't know. So earlier I was talking with Richard about some of the work that he's doing in Calumet City, which isn't exactly the Wolf Lake watershed, but others might be interested. So Richard, would you like to just start off with what you're doing in Calumet City? Is Richard still with us? Okay, he may not be. And so are there others that would like to see something happen at Wolf Lake? Derge, I know you mentioned yesterday the possibility that funding won't be available for the state line, the extension of the state line dike into a road. And I didn't take down the person that is in charge of that with IDNR.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking for my notes. I spoke with George Belovics, who is a project manager on a lot of IDNR projects. They've split up the territory, and there's a young lady who is taking George's position in the Calumet area, and I can't recall her name. I did write it down, and I'll send it to you, Michael.
Okay.
And I guess I'm not saying that project will be on hold forever. William Powers is one of the busiest state parks in the entire state of Illinois. But the IDNR down in Springfield, has to represent the whole state. And so I think if the general public, everybody on this participating today, were to remind the IDNR, secretary of the IDNR, that Wolf Lake is so heavily used, that puts a little more focus on allocating funds to Wolf Lake. Instead of waiting 5 years for that project, maybe it'll be 3 years. I mean, so I mean, being a little bit vocal, I think, about how important, how many people use William Powers is just the effect of good lobbying.
Okay. Is there someone else that would like to talk about whatever you would be interested in seeing happen in the watershed?
Well, okay, Wayne Schimpf here, wearing the hat of the conservation chairman for the Pathway to Adventure Council, and we'll be on November 11th launching a distinguished conservation award program. And the Conservation Award program has three facets to it, and this is where a scout learns about the conservation issue and working with a conservation advisor, and then develops a on-the-ground program to do something about mitigating the problem using environmental justice attitude and philosophy, and also to help mitigate climate change. And then the third component is to educate others. Well, the scouts also go to local schools, and they're also, some of them attend faith-based organizations that sometimes are represented by the organization Faith in Place. And then also there's the state environmental education network in that. So I think that there's some, significant players, and I've been working with Ted Panesius of the IDNR in order to begin to look at mobilizing some of these resources to be used on all state properties throughout the state. And we could pilot some of the first programs at Powers and Wolf Lake, areas. So I think that we've got to expand and maybe have another Zoom meeting like this with some of the program implementation leaders and thinkers in that to develop a plan similar to the one that I did with Waukegan KEG, which resulted in a $1.45 million Great Lakes restoration initiative to educate and involve the community up there in their Waukegan River watershed and the Superfund sites that were related to it. So I think that we've got the scientific groundwork here that Michael has, that's been laid out yesterday and today in that. And I can't stay too much longer because I've got a Zoom meeting with some people in Holland and that about working with the Dutch government and getting teens involved with environmental education activities there. But I think that we've got a unique opportunity to give the, teens that I see as the leaders in this, program using the knowledge that, everybody has laid out, that teens welcome this excitement, the mystery and so on. You've got facts in that, you've got a challenge, and they can make a difference. So I think that we've got to get our heads together to think about, developing a delivery program to get more people on the ground, learning, doing, growing in this area.
Yeah, Wayne, before you leave, I want to introduce you to Marianne Kozlowski, who's at Acres Grove. She's and Marianne, the two of you should, I'm talking about getting heads together.
Yeah.
Hi, Wayne.
Well,
you probably know me. Wayne, you probably, you may not remember me, but I used to be one of the restorationists up in Old Edgebrook that caught so much grief.
Oh, yes, I know. Yes, very familiar face in that. So yes. You escaped the wrath of the.
Yes, and I have landed on the southeast side, and I can't tell you what a warmer, more welcoming environment there is down here compared to what you and I faced up in a very privileged area of Northwest Chicago, where people fought restoration tooth and nail. To come down here is really wonderful. Yes, Wayne, we need to reconnect.
Okay. Well, let's do so in that because I think that with this effort, and I think that if we engage Ted Panesius, Michael, do you know Ted Panesius of the IDNR?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to send an email introduction to both you and he in that, because his title for the IDNR is the Director of Community Outreach, but basically he's the an earpiece for Governor Pritzker into conservation issues and so on, throughout the state. And so he carries a lot of weight and can cut through red tape and so on. And then also he works with the chairperson, who's an elected official from Chicago, who's head of the state House of Representatives Committee on Conservation and Education. So between her and Ted, that a lot can be moved rapidly with a good plan that needs implementation. So I think we've got to get together and so on with my old friend from Edgebrook. Boy, it's fun seeing you again and
Yeah.
thinking back to our many battles we had up there in the
I
So
could tell one story on Wayne. There was a particularly heated meeting where one of the anti-restorationists stood up and said, "I have 7 words for you all," and something like read page whatever out of what had turned into a very controversial book on the Northwest Side, Miracle Under the Oaks. And this particular woman objected to the fact that the restorationists were girdling trees which didn't belong, were in places where they didn't belong, and needed to be removed. Anyway, she went on for quite some time, and then Wayne stood up after she spoke and said, "First of all, it isn't," I think she said something like, "I have 7 words for you, read page whatever." And you said, "It isn't 7 words, it's 5. And I've got some words for you. Read the whole book." And that's what you told her. I still remember that. That was one of the best rejoinders of that horrible time. But Wayne, I am co-steward with John Pasterik at Eggers Grove.
okay.
And Eggers has benefited hugely. I don't know if Isa's still on the call, but Colleen McVeigh has been my contact for the longest time for the Kimby program. Calumet is my backyard.
Yeah.
And COVID has shut the whole thing down. And we used to have what amounted to, just hundreds of student visits a year. I mean, classes kept coming through. And now I've heard that the Chicago Public Schools, I believe, have either let go or furloughed their staff who worked with that program. And I really miss not seeing those students. And, in fact, Michael,
all the ones on the door hook.
Michael, when you asked, what we would like to see for the Wolf Lake watershed.
That's a short sleeve. Yeah, I've been wearing that quite regularly. Yeah.
Personally, what I would love to see is just having that Kimby program restored. It meant so much to Eggers, and I know it meant a lot to the students. We reached so many high school and grade school students, and it's really it's a terrible casualty of COVID.
Well, I think that one thing that we can do with COVID, as I mentioned, our scouts are gearing up and doing more, working with the various volunteer stewards and so on in the forest preserves, in going out one patrol or some through the scout program. But keep in mind that these scouts are also students in respective schools. And so I think that if you want to see youth power, come out, and then the other thing that we have an opportunity to do is through my caretakers of the Environment International program, that we have a way that high school students and that are doing local projects, say steward work under your guidance, and that can share it with volunteer restoration students in about 100 countries around the world. And so we have a regular sharing process. So what they're doing on the Serengeti Plain in Africa with some of the rural, high school students there, and with what they're doing at Edgar's, with WhatsApp on their cell phone, they can be out in the field there and network and everything. So I think that we've got a lot of exciting possibilities. So you and I've got to meet with, and get some noodling together and everything to become engaged in the launch of our new council conservation program. So, a spark plug like you that, has the feeling, the knowledge, and has seen what can happen. We've got to talk to Ted and get us some coastal zone management funding and that to get a good, program going that would, benefit, the region down there in that. So, no, I think that reading the rest of the book,
Yeah.
I think we got to write the rest of the book before we
That's
can.
true too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get together and do that. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to interrupt a little bit,
Sure.
Wayne and
Yeah.
Marianne, because we're running out of time. But this discussion actually will be continued tomorrow morning, because we'll be receiving reports from 3 teachers in this Calumet area, and and they were fellowship recipients from Ollie, and COVID has kind of interrupted their projects, but they'll be here tomorrow morning to explain their approach, and Wayne, if you could attend that, you might have some feedback on that as well.
Okay, I'll try and do my best. Although I'm a horticulture advisor to a community garden, and we usually meet at 9 o'clock, and they always have a list of questions to pick my mind. But I think I'll tell them to, I'll have to talk to them later, because I think this is more important, since you've got the scientific resource base and the energies there ready to empower others. I'll make an effort to be there.
Okay, is there any other posing questions?
Well, since I see Durs Anderson on the call, I just wanted to thank him for turning me on to the data on trail usage through the Strava heat map. I referred to that when we put in our applications for trails in Calumet City to the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. And then after that, one of the engineers working on another trail project around the Dalton Road area was asking me about where I found the trail usage information. So yeah, he really was thankful to have that too.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out this morning, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9 when we start out with the 3 teachers fellowship winners. So thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks,
Thank you,
Marianne.
Michael. Bye.
Yeah. Good to see you.